So yeah, let's get started. For those of you who don't know me, I am Stephen Lauber. I'm the CEO at Trailhead. We are a cloud-focused technology management firm, and we're based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And our specialization is taking the complexity, the unexpected costs, and the frustrations out of secure, reliable IT. So I started Trailhead 24 years ago. And in addition to my duties as CEO, I've been fortunate to have opportunities to share our experiences and our insights with other business leaders as a presenter and a speaker at events around the country. And I've had a number of articles featured in business journals and media outlets. So that's some background information, but why do we do webinars like this? And what motivates me to accept speaking engagements and presentations? Well, it's about my mission, and that's to empower business owners, to give them the tools they need to take control of their technology, to better manage it, and in turn, reduce their business risk. You see, there are too many business owners. They aren't effectively managing their technology. They lack a strategic approach to their technology initiatives, and they make reactive decisions. This leads to increased costs, unnecessary risk exposure, and missed opportunities. So anytime I get to speak in front of an audience like this, or talk with business leaders, that's an opportunity to advance that mission. And that leads into today's topic. Your outdated computers are holding you back. I'm going to give you 6 signs to look for. These are the signs that you need a better way, that you need to make that critical shift that all businesses need to make to cloud computers. And if you have any questions along the way here, just go ahead and pop them up in the chat. We'll have time at the end to take a look and get you answers. But before we get too far along, let's clarify what we mean by a traditional desktop computer. This is the computer setup that many businesses follow today. I'm talking about that desktop computer that you're probably familiar with. It has all the physical parts, like a hard drive and a motherboard and such, and the software parts, things like an operating system, programs that are installed on it, drivers and things like that. That software is connected directly to the physical hardware of the computer. Everything is installed onto that computer's hard drive. And all the processing, the work, it's all done there locally on that computer. And you probably save data to a file server, maybe on site there at that same location. All of this is repeated for each person in the organization. And some people may have more than one computer, like a laptop or a computer in a remote location, maybe at their home. So when we use the term desktop in computer terms, it's that space where a user is doing their work. They have their desktop set up a certain way, shortcuts and settings, their preferences. It's where they interact with their data and programs. And in most traditional situations, that desktop experience occurs directly on the local physical computer. So what are some of the signs that you should be looking for that indicate this traditional approach isn't working for you? Well, the first one is not being able to use multiple computers easily. Maybe you have a different experience with each computer. It takes a lot of time to get this dialed in the way you like it on a computer. And then when you use a different computer, everything changes. You're missing programs. You can't run the same program on your laptop that you could when you're in the office on that computer. Or files are missing, or they're different versions. Then when you get to a computer, when you get that new computer, getting it set up the way you want, it's a real hassle. You have to go through all of that headache again, getting all of that software set up. Things don't work right because you need a newer version of a program to be able to run on the new computer, or you don't have the installer for some software that you downloaded 3 years ago. Where you need to keep the old computer around just to run 1 or 2 things that aren't working on the new computer. Sometimes you think it might just be easier to stick with the old computer and not deal with all the headache of the new computer. All right, so number two, working remotely is a pain. You can't get all that data that you need. You saved a file on the file server in the office, and you can't get to it when you're traveling or when you're trying to update it from home. Do you ever need to set up a VPN connection to get those files back in the office? VPNs can be really messy, or they can slow things down. They can be technically challenging, and they might require more IT expertise than your average worker has. And what about those home computers? Do you have users that are accessing your business networks from home? They have that VPN connection that's connecting those computers right onto your trusted business network. So this happened a lot during the pandemic, right? So many businesses, they rushed to get people connected from home. They didn't have the time to think things through, all of the security concerns of connecting all of these unknown, unprotected computers right up to the corporate network. If you did that, have you gone back and made sure all the same protections are in place? All of those security measures that you have in the office to protect the corporate network. Are you still sure that um, when you're those computer, that are you still sure when you're there that those computers are protected in that same way when they're working remotely? I know many businesses haven't, and they've unknowingly extended their network perimeters to include a lot of devices that they didn't, meet their security policies. And another thing to consider with remote workers is how easy is it to get IT support for them? Can your IT staff support them in the same way when they are away from the office? So the third sign, it's that constant cycle of large hardware purchases. If you're really doing it right, you should be replacing that traditional desktop computer about every 3 years. When you extend the life beyond that, you can expect to start experiencing frequent performance and reliability issues. And so there's a significant cost each time you do this. I mean, you have the obvious cost of the computer and the software, but you also have the cost of having someone set everything up each time you buy that new computer. Or if you're doing this yourself, there's all that time you aren't focusing on what you really should be, instead of messing with getting that new computer working the way you need it. We talked about this earlier, but that setup time usually stretches on longer than you planned, causing even more disruption or more expense. And then, are you spending a lot of time repairing these computers? Do you need IT expertise to do that? And then, oh joy, you get to do it all over again, sooner than you probably expect. It reminds me of one thing we used to do back when we were supporting a lot of on-premise servers. We would send a birthday card to a client for their server. Something like, "Hey, happy birthday! Your server just turned 3 years old." And we didn't do this to be a downer or anything, but usually folks would be surprised when we would go over a computer aging report. They'd say things like, "No way! I can't believe that server's 2 years old already. It seems like we just put it in a few months ago." And the fourth thing to be looking for is flexibility. How challenging is it to make upgrades when you need some more horsepower to keep up? Or you have a new software program that needs a different video adapter to run. This requires additional hardware. You probably need to order the parts. If you're like me and you've been around for a while, you probably remember being able to go down to a local computer store and pick up most of the parts you might need. But today we're usually ordering something online, and depending on how urgent the need is, you might be paying a premium, to get it a little faster or waiting a while. Then when it does arrive, you're going to need to schedule time to shut everything down, take things apart, and hope it all comes back online correctly, or doesn't cause a problem with something else. This process makes it difficult to increase capacity. When you bring on new staff or you have a project that needs more resources for a short time, it's just not easy to scale out and then to scale that back in when you no longer need it. So you probably end up with some spare workstations just sitting around unused, waiting to be used again at some point, and you're not recouping any of those expenses. Let's talk about all that extra technology. Things are likely there in your office to support that traditional computer. You probably have a file server or other servers that are used to handle things like file sharing or printing or directory services. That's what handles user accounts and policies, passwords, and things like that. Most businesses have multiple servers at their locations to support all this. And that can make backup and disaster planning real challenging. If you need these servers running on site to be able to perform critical functions, then you still pretty much have an intense backup process, and you need to ensure that those backups are getting shipped somewhere off site in case something were to happen to your building. Things like fire, or flood, or theft. That all needs to be managed well. And oh, by the way, that all comes with its own hardware and software, like failover systems or recovery appliances. Just more physical pieces to be managing and budgeting for, and make and more things that can fail. Maybe the most significant thing to mention here is that when you have all of these critical systems on site at your location, your disaster recovery options become really limited. It's not easy to get all of that up and running somewhere else. So you end up with increased business risk or increased cost to protect it all, or probably both. Then another question I get from business owners is, hey, we moved all of our line of business apps to the cloud, and we moved to a cloud email service like Microsoft 365 years ago, but I still have servers here on site. Why do I need all of these? When can I get everything up in the cloud? And then number six, we touched on this a bit already, but sometimes even those relatively new computers can start to slow down. And you're looking for ways to fix that problem. Maybe you try more memory or a faster hard drive. Trying any of these upgrades is going to take time and money and cause interruptions like we've mentioned. You probably can't do it without some IT help also. And you really have no way to know if the upgrades are going to help. You just kind of have to wait and see after you go through all the hassle of doing the upgrade to see if it had an effect. So if you're seeing any of these signs, you're probably asking, hey, is there a better way? Absolutely. There is a better way. And that's where a virtual cloud desktop, like Azure Virtual Desktop, provides a better way. Imagine a workspace, where your entire desktop environment, the applications, the files and settings were all accessible from anywhere, at any time, on any device. That's the power of Azure Virtual Desktop. It's really a game-changing solution. Changes the way we think about desktop computing. Traditionally, each employee would have a physical computer or a laptop tethered to a specific location, limiting flexibility and productivity. But Azure Virtual Desktop, or as we often call it, AVD, it changes the game entirely. It moves your desktop experience to the cloud, offering a virtual workspace really accessible from any internet-connected device. With Azure Virtual Desktop, businesses can create virtual machines in the cloud that behave just like their traditional desktop environments. Users can log into these virtual desktops from anywhere, on any device, including laptops or tablets, thin clients, and smartphones. And you only need to set up your desktop environment one time. And there are tools that can make that setup process really simple and fast. And then when you log into your cloud desktop, you get the exact same experience every time from everywhere. You get that same experience. It doesn't matter what device you're using. You can start working on one computer. Maybe you're preparing a presentation and you're working on your computer in the office, and you open up some files and you get them the way you want them for the presentation just right. But you want to do the presentation from your laptop in the conference room. No worries. You can just go to your laptop and connect to that same virtual desktop. All of the things you were working on when you were using the other computer, they are still there just as you left them. You can pick right up where you left off. No need to worry about copying files from one computer to the other, or messing with the settings to get it to look right on the second computer. It's all the same. You're always using the same desktop, no matter what device you connect to your desktop from. And you can also use devices that you wouldn't normally be able to run a Windows desktop on. Things like smartphones or tablets, maybe an iPad, pretty much any device that can connect to the internet. With a virtual desktop, we're breaking that tether between the software and the physical device. You're running the software pieces, again, thinking operating system, programs, and settings. Those are all in the cloud, allowing you to connect from any physical device and get that same desktop experience. And this can make getting a new computer a fun experience again. Pretty much just turn it on and get it connected to the internet. The setup process is something that most people can handle. Like the process of starting up a new phone or a smart device. You don't need to be an IT expert because all of that configuration has been done already in the cloud and to set up your desktop. You just need to connect to it. So have fun with that shiny new device instead of dreading spending hours or days getting it configured the way you need it. With a virtual desktop, you have a smaller initial cost. You don't need the horsepower on that local computer. The processing and computing actions are happening in the cloud desktop, not on the local physical device. The cost savings and efficiencies really increase when we consider devices like thin clients or zero client devices. And that's a computer with a very simple, trimmed down operating system without all the added excess of an operating system like Windows or Mac OS. Its only purpose is to connect a user to their virtual cloud desktop. These thin client computers have a longer lifespan than a traditional desktop computer since they don't have all the moving parts and much of the things that will fail or wear out on a standard computer. They require little to no ongoing maintenance, a fraction of the upkeep that a traditional computer requires over its lifespan. You may also be able to repurpose older computers and get users connected to their cloud desktops. With cloud desktops, you can move to a more predictable budgeting module, where you pay for what you use in the cloud when you need it and how you need it, rather than that large hardware expense each time you replace an aging computer. And the costs and efforts to support cloud desktops is reduced when compared to supporting traditional desktops. You're not chasing as many hardware problems. We've been supporting cloud computers, now with users for a number of years, and we see a consistent reduction in their help desk support usage with Azure Virtual Desktop, and the ticket resolution times are shorter as well. Another feature of Azure Virtual Desktop is that you can easily use cloud file sharing services. Things like Azure Files, which provides a file sharing service, file sharing as a service without the burden of a file server to maintain. You can think of it much like the move most companies went through with email services. Most companies had email servers in their offices at some point in the past. Those servers had many different components that were needed to provide the email mailboxes and email delivery services for the business users. These on-premise email services, they tended to fail frequently. They had many moving parts and pieces and needed a lot of help from IT to stay up and running effectively. Anytime something broke down on the server or in the environment, like an internet connection or power, email services for the entire company stopped. For a long time, this was the norm with business email. But now we have cloud email services like Microsoft 365. Users just need to connect to their mailbox from anywhere with an internet connection. Email just works. We don't need to worry about all the underlying pieces that make it happen. Microsoft delivers the email as a service. Azure Files is much the same way. You get file sharing provided to you as a service, like email, without managing the file server that does all of the behind-the-scenes stuff. And since Azure Files and Azure Virtual Desktop are set up on the same virtual network in the cloud, working with those files is very fast. It's a much better experience than what users of VPNs or other remote access solutions are used to. You don't get that long delay when opening up large files. Azure Files and Azure Virtual Desktop, they're often the last step that a business needs to move to a serverless on-premise environment. In situations where a server is still needed for other applications or databases, for example, we can spin up virtual servers in that same cloud network. Of course, when you reduce the amount of on-premise computing resources and computing power, you're going to reduce your energy consumption, which can have a number of additional benefits. Flexibility and scalability is greatly improved with virtual cloud desktops. You can add resources almost at will, increase or decrease horsepower on the fly as needed. And then with scripting and automation, creating new systems can be as simple as pushing a button. We go from taking days or weeks to bring on new systems to minutes. This opens up other possibilities that were very difficult or near impossible in a traditional computer model. And you can easily create test environments to experiment with changes or different scenarios, then remove them when they are no longer needed. If you're curious about adding more computing horsepower and how it will improve or impact performance, you can apply those changes, resize or adjust things, then see what the impact was, without the risk of investing in unnecessary or inadequate hardware upgrades. Azure Virtual Desktop also brings with it many additional security benefits. You can store sensitive data and applications in Azure instead of on the hard drives of individual computers. This reduces the risk of a loss or a breach through theft or computers that go missing. With Azure Virtual Desktop, you can enforce all of your security protections and mechanisms in one place and have confidence that the controls you enforce are really working, regardless of the device users are connecting to their virtual cloud desktop from. In addition to security controls you enforce on the virtual desktop environment, you can take advantage of additional security protections that come along with Azure. Things like data encryption and conditional access policies and role-based access control. And if you're in a highly regulated industry, you may need the ability to have isolated individual workloads or to segment different systems of your environment. The virtual cloud environments make this much easier to achieve than traditional physical on-premise systems. And we've chosen to build our virtual cloud solution on Microsoft's Azure cloud. I realize there are many opinions out there about where to locate your cloud workloads, whether it be Azure or AWS or Google Workspace. For us, there just is no comparison with virtual cloud desktops, with that tight integration that Azure cloud has with the rest of the Microsoft products that most companies are already using. Microsoft owns and delivers the underlying products that make the foundation of the Windows desktop and Microsoft Office experience. But beyond that, the resources that Microsoft puts into the Azure cloud and continues to add is second to none. They have a global footprint with more than 300 data centers in over 60 regions around the globe. That's far more than any other cloud provider. And for those that are still considering maintaining your own data center on premise, if you need a geographically distributed environment, for example, or just need to replicate data across data centers in the same country, you won't be able to build or maintain your own data centers that come anywhere close to the Azure cloud. It offers just unparalleled ease and capabilities when you're considering backup and redundancy. I don't encounter this as much anymore, but it does still happen on occasion. And that's the business owner who is just terrified to put their data in the cloud. They'll say things like, I just feel better having my data here in my building, or I worry that others will be able to get to it when I put it up in the cloud, or what happens, when I lose internet in our office. If our data is up in the cloud, we won't be able to work. In reality, their risks are far greater when their data exists only at their location. I can pretty much guarantee that you won't be able to offer the same protections, the resiliency, and the support for your data in your location that you can when you utilize world-class infrastructure and systems like Azure. If you were to try to come even close in an on-premise scenario, the cost would be out of reach for all but the largest enterprises. What about that situation where you do lose internet in your office? When that happens, your virtual cloud desktop is still running, just waiting for you to reconnect to it. That could be as easy as a failed over internet connection for the office, or using hotspots on cell phones, for example, or just getting your users to a location that has internet or power. The desktop experience for them is the same no matter where they connect from. It's not easy to do if you have all of your eggs in one basket at one location. With traditional on-premise computers, if you lose access to the internet, your users can't get to their data from remote locations. They probably can't do much without the internet in the office, since things like email and many of their line of business apps are in the cloud too. But without their desktops, they are really stuck. If you lose power or suffer something worse that takes out an entire facility, like maybe a tornado or a fire, how quickly can you get everything restored and functional? I'm sure it's nowhere near as quick and easy as just getting to another internet source. For many small businesses, they have an IT person or maybe a few people that know their whole deployment inside and out. They know what goes where and why, and how to turn things on in just the right order and connect things in just the right way. Whenever something bad happens, it gets escalated to this person, and he or she is the ultimate technical guru when it comes to your data center. The question you need to ask is, does this pass the bus test? Or I like to call it the potato truck test. So that's what one of my first bosses used to ask me some 30 odd years ago. Can your business survive if this individual would get hit by a potato truck? Or more likely, find another job? Would you be able to operate if that were to happen? Is this a risk to your business you can tolerate? For some, the risk is acceptable, but for others who are thinking of continuity and risk mitigation and building long-term business value, it's just not. So if you've had that aha moment at some point during this session, you're probably thinking, how do we get started? And that's really the simple part. Just head over to trailheadnetworks.com/cloud-ready, or you can scan the QR code. There you can schedule a free cloud readiness assessment. We have some other resources there that will. And if you do schedule an assessment, we'll take a look at your current environment and see what existing workloads you have that might be able to move to the cloud. And we'll also look for any issues, things that could potentially be a barrier or a hurdle for you to running virtual clouds desktops efficiently. You'll also receive cost estimates for adding virtual cloud desktops to your business. There's no obligation or pressure to buy, so I encourage you to take advantage of that at trailheadit.com/cloud-ready. And there is also an e-guide that you can download on that webpage. It has more information about Azure Virtual Desktop. So, and feel free to ask, send any questions you might have to ask@trailheadnetworks.com, or call us, and we got some contact information on the next slide for that. So here's that contact info, right? So be happy to help answer any questions that you have. And with that being said, we do have some time left here that we can answer some questions now if you have them. So go ahead and put those up in the chat. And if you're watching this as a recording after the live event, you can still get those questions answered. Just send them to ask@trailheadnetworks.com, and we'll get back to you with a response. So, all right, taking a look here, I do have a couple questions that had come in, so maybe we'll just jump into those. Let's see, here's one question. How does Azure Virtual Desktop handle software updates and patches? Yeah, that's a good question. So Azure Virtual Desktop, it really simplifies this process of managing these updates and the patches. With AVD and virtual desktops, they're centrally managed and they share a common base image. So the updates can be deployed across all virtual machines really easily. You can be assured everyone is running the latest version of software without the need for individual updates on each physical device like you have kind of in the traditional model. It really saves a ton of time for IT staff typically, and ensures just this common experience for all users. So good question. Here's another one. Can we run specialized software in Azure Virtual Desktop or applications that require high computing power? Yeah, no, absolutely. AVD really it has a wide range of virtual machine sizes and configurations that we can use, including options for really like high performance GPUs, for example. Um, Oftentimes we can get that experience in Azure to even be better than what people are maybe used to on their local machines. Um, we have a number of architects that work in Azure Virtual Desktop at clients of ours, and we've been able to give them these optimized GPUs that oftentimes have been better than what their experience was on the machines that they were using before they went into Azure Virtual Desktop. They're just, and that scalability too is huge, so that if we have a situation where someone is maybe struggling with performance, we can add more horsepower, maybe give them a different CPU, more memory, things like that, and adjust those really on the fly, really just in a matter of minutes, and see if it makes a difference, or maybe just for a short period of time, right? They might be saying, hey, I need to do some rendering, for example, on this day for a day or two, and I need a little more horsepower now, but then I'm going to stop doing that for the next month. I don't need to spend the same amount of money that I would for that high horsepower machine. We can scale it up and down. Can't really do that easily at all with traditional on-premise computers. So yeah, that's a good one. Thank you for that question. That's a common concern we get typically from the users that are maybe used to a more higher horsepower type of machine. But yes, absolutely, we can do that. So not seeing any other questions here at the moment. And yeah, that's about all the time we have set for today. But again, if you have any more questions that come up in the future, shoot us an email to ask@trailheadnetworks.com or give us a call. And again, head on over to trailheadit.com/cloud ready to schedule a free cloud readiness assessment. And if you found this webinar useful, take a look at our webinar page. You can see what webinars we have coming up, and you can view recordings from past webinars. So if you're interested in that, go to our webinar page at trailheadit.com/webinars, or again, scan this QR code. Yeah, all right. So I hope you found this helpful, and thanks so much for joining me today. And go out and have a great rest of your day.